The world was nice. I was comfortable. My relationships were good.
Mm-hmm.
Things are rockier now with some relationships now that they know I have faith and they think I'm just crazy. But the real brownie is so good. It's so good.
Welcome to the Unitarian Christian Alliance podcast, episode 81, Reconstructing to Relationship, with guest Josiah Wright. This is part 2. I'm Mark Cain. I'd suggest not thinking of this as a how to escape agnosticism lesson. It's how Josiah came out of it, and in that telling, you will find insights that apply to you and some that may not. Josiah also has some advice at the end for people in 4 agnostic categories. First, those sliding into agnosticism. Second, those who have landed there and plateaued, though I think that's the wrong word, deplateaued. Third, those who are coming out of it. And then fourth, those on the outside who have loved ones who are going through the process. Maybe you are a Unitarian Christian, grew up in a Unitarian Bible-believing group. You've not had to walk away from your church, your family, your friends, and all the very, very confident things that they told you about the Trinity and those dastardly heretics. But you would be an exception here. In the UCA, most of you are folks who partook in some form of the Perilous Trinity Deep Dive, Episode 1. You firsthand saw your theological castle of cards come crashing down, starting with the most, quote, significant Christian doctrine of all, the Trinity. You may have noticed this about politics. If something is a bit lacking in facts, you make up for it with what? Energy, repetition, and fear. All this, you must believe in the Trinity to be a Christian energy, ends up backfiring when someone in the pew realizes it's merely a human theory. And then it all comes crashing down. If my pastor can make something as flawed as the Trinity into the capstone of Christianity, what other errors has he so confidently been feeding me? What's wrong with just being honest, teaching the Trinity as a theory, with its challenges, conflicting explanations, and its torrid and embarrassing history? Why not put Jesus as the Messiah as the capstone of the faith instead? Why not? Same reason political opinions are rarely changed by facts. People are flawed and prideful. So most here in the UCA had to take the Trinity is wrong realization directly to the gut. And it hurt. It's no wonder faith can get wobbly, confidence wanes, doubts erupt everywhere. It's an extremely disruptive discovery. For some of you, these doubts persisted. This is why Josiah's honesty here is so meaningful to me. You may be at some point on this same journey, and I, or another listener, may need to be your friend. Josiah had been praying for something to happen. And then things did. And they were getting harder to put into the just a coincidence bucket.
So the second thing that happened was Jackson and I had come up with a plan. It was basically I needed to be switched from being prepaid to postpaid. So it worked for him, worked for me. My wife was planning on coming about 2 weeks later in the middle of the month. She asked if she could go visit her friend in Louisville, which was past Paducah, Kentucky, where we live now. So she would need some extra gas money for that. And she said, and the oil, change oil light came on. Normally I would do that, but
You're not there.
I'm not there.
Mm-hmm.
So I was like, let me put a pencil to this because I know Jackson crunched some numbers to put in some cushion. And it ended up, when I put a pencil to it, we didn't have enough money for that, but we had way less money than I think we had calculated for, Jackson and I. So I messaged him. I was like, hey, we need to redo this because we're pretty far off. I'm not going to have enough money to pay my bills in August. And it was still June. So he messaged back and he's like, are you doubting? I was like, no, I'm not doubting you. He was talking about God. And I was like, I'm not doubting you. I'm just, trying to be strategic about this. He's like, no. I know you're not a Christian, but it's pretty obvious to anybody God's working in your life. I don't think you should doubt. And I was like, well, that's nice for you to say, but I don't know about this. This is, taking care of my family we're talking about. He's like, I think you should just wait. I bet something's going to happen tonight. I know now, I was skeptical at the time. I know he hadn't talked to Pastor, but basically Pastor, halfway through his sermon that night, he stopped midway and was like, Josiah, you have a need. I want to know what it is because we're going to take care of it tonight. I don't want to tell him anything. because I don't want to, I don't want that confirmation bias stuff. He's like, tell me what it is. I was like, okay. So I was like, I need money. It's like, what? I need money. And like 6 months prior with my job, I could have, been helping that body of believers. They don't have a lot of money. But
you're talking about the members of
that church.
It's not, there's not a lot of money there.
Yeah, not a lot of money there. They're just people that get together and love each other.
Mm-hmm.
But they just brought the cash out of their wallets, and basically they gave all that money to me, and it was $11 more than what we needed. But the only reason it was $11 more is because my wife found like a $10 coupon on the oil change. So I was like, okay, there's one more coincidence, but that stuff happens, even to other people of other religions. So several things like that happen. And it kept getting a little more, okay, I don't know about this. But still the whole time Jackson would talk to me, and I would reason myself out of it, because I'd be like, no, okay, now that you're pointing out all the reasons you think it's God, I'm like, I can see some reasons why it might not be. And it'd be really cool if it was, but I don't want to just step into something just because I want to believe it. I want it to be real.
Was your I'm not sure machine running so smoothly that it just naturally fell into the I'm not sure? Or were you actually resisting it being from God?
I wasn't resisting it being from God. I kind of wanted it to be, but it was really that machine of, I want reality, period. If it's God, fantastic. I know that life already, and I know I liked it, but I want it to be reality. I think if it were resisting God, Jackson would have reasoned to be out of it. He is very good at taking apart piece by piece the way somebody thinks and then trying to point them in the right direction. And so if it were just resisting God, I knew in the back of my head, God's probably doing all this, but I don't want to. He would have picked that apart immediately.
Okay. Good for Jackson. All right. So several of these experiences were taking place.
Yes.
So keep going down this path.
Yeah. The Sunday before my wife was going to be there, basically right before the service started, the pastor's wife got up and said, I feel like the Holy Spirit is saying there's people struggling with their salvation in here, and we need to get that taken care of before we do anything else. And I was like, well, I hope they don't call on me, because I'm going to be honest with them. I'm not struggling with my salvation. I'm battling whether God exists or not. What happened was really cool. She would call on somebody and say, I think the Lord says you're struggling with salvation. Is that true? And they'd be like, well, yeah, this or that aspect of it. And that lingo, I don't really like that lingo for many reasons, but to them that meant, yeah, I don't know if God's happy about this part of my life, or yeah, I'm struggling with my faith in this part of my life, or yeah, my faith is waning because there's horrible things going on in my life.
Okay.
And so they would give some aspect of that, but not the whole story. And John Fitzgerald and John Truitt were both at the front just praying for people. And what would happen for every single person, there was about 6 or 8 people that went up. And John Truitt would say, he would be quiet for a little bit. And he'd say, I feel like the Lord is saying this about your life, or this sin that you're struggling with. And it was very detailed stuff. Every single time he would say what it was, and he'd ask him, does that make sense? Is that what's going on? And they'd be like, yes. And he'd be like, well, the Lord says to think about it this way, or the Lord says you need to get that out of your life. I saw all of their lives changing in really good ways that they could move forward with. And I was like, I really kind of like this, even though that supernatural thing might not be exactly what these Christians think it is. It might not be exactly the God they think it is. He's obviously, is obviously moving in some way, because this is pretty different. What happened about the 6th person, the pastor comes back to me and says, I feel like the Lord is telling you that you're a wounded sheep and he's not going to stop chasing you till you come home. And I was like, well, that sounds really nice, but I was like, thank you. But in my head, I was like, yeah, it's kind of a generic thing to say. And so I hope he is.
Yeah.
And then he went away. And then from the front, instead of saying, Josiah, you're struggling with salvation, come up here. At that point, I had figured out he didn't really know where my faith was at all. But he was like, Josiah, you need prayer. Come up here. As you said before, I'm an agnostic. I don't mind getting prayed for. It either will work, won't work, whatever. We'll see.
Yeah.
So I went up there, and John Truitt was normally the one, prophesying about these people's lives and reading their mail. And so he kind of looks at me.
Like reading their mail?
Yeah. It's like somebody opened up your mail and read it to you without even looking at your mail.
Knowing that information.
Knowing what's going on.
Without having actually read the mail.
So I saw him do that for other people, and he kind of looked at me when I got up there, and was like, well, Josiah, I know everything about you, but I feel like the Lord's reminding me, like 6 months ago, you were calling me, you're having a rough time, And I told you that I felt like the Lord was saying that you're a lost sheep and he's not going to stop chasing you until he brings you home. I was like, I did forget about that. And he was like, well, I feel like the Lord's saying he's going to keep chasing you. But he said, it reminds me of this reel I saw the other day. He said, there's this sheep that had gotten stuck upside down with its feet sticking out of the mud. And this shepherd came and pulled it out. And then the sheep just ran in another mud hole. He's like, you can keep doing that, but the Lord's just going to keep bringing you back. He really sees your heart, that you're honest and that you want to come home. But you got to repent of this unbelief. I was like, I can't just not believe. I want to be honest. I can't just believe. I can't do that.
Right, okay.
So in my head, it was still too much to process because all of this was happening within 30 minutes. And I was just like, I don't know. He's like, I'm going to pray for you because that's what he'd done for everybody. And he stops and he goes, well, I want Conrad to pray for you. And Conrad he definitely knew nothing about me. Very, very, very quiet guy. He's retired now, is older. And so he starts to pray for me, and he prayed like for 5 minutes, it seemed like, and prayed everything that I had prayed in the past year. Just random stuff that nobody would ever pray.
When you say things that you prayed, you mean like,
yeah.
Well, like you had mentioned earlier, like
yes.
you'd pray like, if you're there, God.
Yeah. He would say, just for Josiah, when he's reaching out to whoever or whatever's out there, just let him know that it's you and open up his blind.
Oh, so he was using your framework.
Yes.
In his language was your prayers.
Yeah.
Okay.
And several things like that, time wouldn't permit. It was a very long prayer. And then just also prayed additional things about open his eyes so that they can never be shut again and take the blindness away. And while he was doing that, there was just an intense rushing through my body, like I felt that first time with the blue light. And I was like, wow. I'm not so sure I can keep running from this. I don't think this can go in that I don't know bucket. I think it's pretty clear that whoever this is, like I said before, it may not be exactly who they think it is, but I really like this direction that it's going. So Jackson wanted to talk about it immediately. I was like, I need some time to process.
I mean, that time with the prayer and all of that. Like, as soon as church was over, he's like,
let's get home and talk about this. And I was like, he's like, ride with me. I was like, I really, this was a lot. This is huge. This might be just upsetting everything I thought. Mm-hmm. And so I was like, I need some time. So I thought about it for a while and like, okay, I think, maybe this is it. I'm at least willing to follow, kind of like Ruth, who you follow, I'll follow kind of thing.
Yeah.
And then, so my wife came. She came the following Saturday, and she was going to go to church with me in the morning. And I didn't tell her any of this stuff had happened. Then when she got there, I was like, I kind of want to move here. Like these people, I like my family. They're great people. I feel very secure with these people. There's a pretty good future in the consulting company. It just makes sense to live around these types of people. And she was like, definitely not, all these reasons. And we go back and forth. Okay, it's starting to get heated. I haven't seen you in a couple weeks at least. So I was like, let's just stop talking about it. And then we get into it again, maybe a couple hours later. Because I was like, and I wasn't sure myself. I was like, I do maybe still want to start that shop. I've got a lot of friends there. I get along with my dad. I could still be a Christian and work for this company and not. So there was still an internal battle too. And then Sunday morning, we started talking about it again, back and forth. And then on the way to church, like 5 minutes before we got to church, she was like, oh yeah, I didn't tell you this story. She was afraid to tell me. But she acted like she forgot. And so she told me this story that would take too long to explain, but she got her faith back as well the Sunday before on the same Sunday. I got mine back. I was like, oh my gosh.
Okay.
And so she got to the end of it right as we parked to go into church. And she's like, so I don't know what you believe anymore. And this is bold for her, but I'm a Christian again. And I was like, okay. So we go inside, and the first thing Pastor does, he makes a beeline back to us. He looks at her, looks at me. He didn't even know she was coming. He said, I told you that the Lord was going to heal things back in your land, didn't I? I was like, yeah. He's like, now you're both reconciled back to God, aren't you? I was like, yeah. And then she kind of looks up at him because she hadn't been looking at him, realized he was talking. And he said, whatever you two have been discussing back and forth, God's going to give you the answer today. And if he says to move, you better do it immediately. And her eyes got as big as $50. She was like, what just happened? And by that time, I was used to all the crazy stuff. But God, ever since then, just exponentially, I could go on for days on the stuff he's been doing.
Did you decide that day?
So we didn't get like an audible answer or anything like that. But I think her experience with that maybe shook her up a little bit. When we got back to the house after church, we popped John's tailgate and sat down on the tailgate of his truck and kind of talked for a little bit, but we both were like, yeah, this is what we both want to do.
Okay.
And so the question was gone in my heart, and she went from 100% no to, yeah, this is definitely something I want to do.
Wow. So it was a rapid shift in one
Yes.
day.
Very rapid.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
I have similar thoughts on things that one can just experience or feel. Knowing that somebody who might be, I don't know, a Wiccan, could say, I had this experience. It's never been a confirmational thought for me.
Yeah.
I treat them as neutral. It's like, sure, an experience could be a very positive experience and it could be very meaningful, but it doesn't establish, like when you look at the New Testament, you look at Acts, when they had the Spirit moving in, let's say, like the first sermon, when people were speaking and everybody was hearing their language, like that's not, oh, he had an interesting moment. It's confirmational experiences, not enriching experiences.
Right.
One is very hard to deny. The other one for me is just neutral.
Right.
And so hearing you describe that, I'm like, okay, well, that's what a supernatural experience should do if you're going to look at it as a proof for something.
So, if you listen to the last podcast or talked with me before, I had spiritual experiences before, not that crazy and seemingly undeniable. But if someone were to tell me the same story that I just told you while I was in that agnostic state, I would have been like, that's great. I'm really glad that you had that experience. I hope someday I have the same experience for something. I hope I can be as sure as you are. Yeah. And so if you boil that down, technically I shouldn't still be a Christian at this time because I'd be relying on my experiences. So what happened was God, the day after, started speaking to me like he didn't before. For some people on the podcast, this may be uncomfortable to hear. Well, I'm telling you.
I let people tell their stories because if nothing else, they know that that's what you experienced. And then that helps them understand somebody else's life better.
So the day after God brought me back, there was a lady who she wanted help getting her life back together. We were all praying about it. It's my first day praying about some stuff. And so they were praying about the amount separately. And they all basically just messaged John, hey, this is what I feel like the Lord is saying. And everybody got around $7,500, $7,800 to help her get her life back on track. And I got $500. And I was like, oh, I tried, John. This is what I got. I know that's not enough. I didn't know what everybody else had heard at that time, but
you said $500 because when you were praying about it.
Yeah, that's what popped in my head.
Okay.
So I was like, I've got a great imagination. So, this is probably not God. And they had met and been like, yeah, everybody except for Josiah got around this amount. So they sent her that much. And then the next day, Jackson was like, hey, I've got this $500 gift card for Southwest, and I thought about giving it to this lady. What does everybody think about that? I was like, well, I think that's a good idea. I heard $500 yesterday. So just little things like that. The Lord started to speak to me every single morning in some way, and then throughout the day in conversations. And it was very, very difficult to discern whether it was myself or the Lord or the enemy. A lot of times it would happen like this, where the Lord would say something to me and I wouldn't just believe it because it very easily could have been my own brain. But the next Sunday, there was a guy who had two little girls. He wasn't physically abusing them, but he was very, very rough with them. And I just had this sense of, I don't like this guy. And so I asked the Lord, what am I supposed to think about this guy? I don't like him at all. And I see a lot of injustice going on with his girls. What I heard was, I thought it wasn't from God at all. What I heard was, I'm going to kill this unrighteous man and give his girls to somebody that loves them. That's kind of intense. I bet that's just my creative brain not liking this guy very much.
Yeah, you don't like him, obviously. Yeah. That's where your mind went.
But I still was like, okay, I just want to take this to John. What am I supposed to think about this? This is so frustrating. And so he was like, well, the Bible says prophets are subject to the prophets, and let me pray about it. So he got quiet for a second. He's like, yeah, I don't know about this guy, being killed, but I think you're right about his girls being taken away. Okay, I guess we'll see what happens. And I kind of assumed if it would happen like a month from then, but the next day his girls were taken away from him. And he's been going through this hard process. He's still a member of the church. He kept making dumb mistakes, and we tried to bring him back up, and he'd get more prophecy. I'd hear, you're going to die. And it was very awkward for me, but I was like, I know I'm hearing this. And recently, he got himself in enough trouble that we had to bail him out of jail. Well, we didn't have to, but we felt like that's what the Lord was saying to do. We did that, and he has really been going on the right road. He's been in a battle trying to get his girls back. And what I felt like the Lord said randomly one morning was, tell him that I love him and I'm proud of him. And if he keeps going down this road, the unrighteous man in him will be killed. And he will be the one that I give his girls back to as somebody that loves them the way they should be loved. Wow, that makes a lot more. That sounds a lot more like God. Trying to reconcile stuff.
Yeah.
And so stuff like that, there's some big, heavy things like that. Other little tiny things he's helped me with. My ADHD brain just goes crazy all the time. Can't stop thinking about stuff. So I had 2 experiences before where that blue light experience, I had about an hour of just nothingness, presence with the Lord, and it was amazing where my brain wasn't just going crazy. And then I had one experience as an agnostic where I meditated for 25 minutes, and I had practiced that for a long time, trying to get my brain under control so I could be productive. And I had 5 minutes of nothingness, and I remembered I left a window unlocked somewhere and could actually think clearly. But the Lord, one morning, I was so frustrated because part of what I thought I heard, he said was accurate, and the next thing definitely didn't happen. I was like, God, what am I supposed to do to hear your voice? And everything got still like that again. And my brain was not thinking about everything at once. And I could think clearly. And he said, this is my voice. This is what it sounds like. Anytime you want to hear it, this is what you do. And ever since then, it's like a light switch. I can turn my listening side on anytime I want to. And just little things like that. He's been personally helping me in so many aspects of my life, whether it's giving me the right attitude to have, because the church we're a part of is a very, very different culture than our culture. And so there's a lot of clashings that go on. And so I get a bad attitude about that, ask the Lord, what am I supposed to think about this? And then he reminds me, there's this way you're supposed to act. I was like, oh, yeah, that would work. And so just constantly stuff like that. And so that is what keeps me going. And now it's like so many of those things where I'm actively being helped by obviously an individual out there that I can't see. That's what keeps me grounded. And I would have to just want to be part of the world. And it's like, John and I were talking about it one time. Somebody made keto brownies and somebody made real brownies. And he was talking about how good the keto brownies were. And I was like, yeah, but the real thing. And it's like, yeah, the world was nice. I was comfortable. My relationships were good. Mm-hmm. Things are rockier now with some relationships now that they know I have faith and they think I'm just crazy. But the real brownie is so good. It's so good. I cannot stop eating it. No.
I'm going to name this podcast The Real Brownie.
The Real Brownies.
So good.
Yeah. There we go.
So, for some people, your description of God talking to you, or that isn't a lot of people's experience.
Right.
Or if it is, they don't realize what's happening.
Yeah.
I wouldn't be surprised if there are people who make decisions based upon that kind of influence and just don't even realize that that's potentially what happens.
Totally.
And I've talked about it even here on the podcast about how it's the quiet time. It's the time when you become a listener that the understanding and the insights can come, whether it's, as I usually perceive it, as 2 decisions and one is a peaceful decision and one is not.
Yeah.
The reason that feels peaceful is because God's Spirit in me is literally like instructing me, this will not disrupt your life. This is not danger. You're not running from the truth when you go this route. Whereas this other thing, I don't know, like it's like your soul's like crinkling inside a little bit. Like that's the difference. And for me, then it's not been. I'm trying to imagine if I've ever felt like it was a voice, and I don't think it was. At least not in a way where I was like, God, is that from you, or is that not from you? Whereas maybe I just had an understanding. And I just shared it because it was the right thing to share. And I don't know where it came from. Although I clearly can look back on my life and know that help that I've been able to provide for people, many times I'm like, I didn't know that would be so helpful. I'm like, well, God can do what he needs to do, whether or not I see it in a particular way or see it in a different way.
Right.
If his Spirit is in me and he's pushing on me and he's poking me when I need the poke, there is a guidance. And hearing you describe it as words, it'll be something that I think about, and like maybe I will listen to what I'm hearing a little more clearly and ask more questions about that in my prayer life.
So one of the things he told me to do very early on is get up at 3 a.m. And so I get up at 3 and take a few short naps throughout the day, and told me to walk every morning, and whether it's cold, hot, whatever it is, For the exception of when I was sick, that's what I've done. And that's majority of the time, it's been getting more and more clear every single time. When I started out, it was still very, very frustrating. Then that moment happened where I can turn it on like a light switch. And there's still sometimes I hear wrong, but it gets more and more clear. Some people may be expecting to hear him in a certain way when really he speaks in so many different ways.
Yeah. I have a healthy level of skepticism and stuff. That's why I put a lot of things in the neutral zone. I would believe it if God just did it. Like if one day I was walking down the street and I just knew I needed to pray for that man right there because he needed healing. If I knew that, like literally knew that.
Yeah.
If I was doing this thing in my head where I constantly told myself, I need this, I need this, I need this, I need this, I need this.
Right.
This is just how the world works. If you think about something long enough, you convince yourself something is real.
Totally.
Joel Osteen or whatever, all these groups that are just like, name it and claim it. And they're just like, you drive it into people's heads that this is what they should do and this is what they want. I can't believe any of that because it's generated by an external energy. This is where I'm going.
Yeah.
We operate either on the principle of God working from us from the inside or it comes from the outside. And so when he talks of either it's from the spirit or from the world is the outside. So I've never deliberately had somebody like, show me how to do this, teach me how to do this, because I knew in my head, as soon as that would happen, I'd be like, well, the reason that it's this way for me now is because I just basically gave the power to that person to talk me into it. And so I'm like, no, I can't do that.
Yeah.
But, okay, God, if I'm walking down the street and it's just like, now, go. I'm like, well, okay, I wasn't asking for that. I wasn't clamoring for it. I didn't have somebody tell me, this is how it will be, Mark. You will hear it and it will sound like this. And I'm like, I deliberately don't want to ask those questions. I want it to be the kind of thing that is from internal, where I believe God's Spirit works in our lives, not from the really charismatic pastor who's convinced that this is how you will know. The one who's praying for people, but actually is pushing them as they knock them over. Like, are you actually pushing them physically? And they think, like this is, it just feels so externally motivated. I mean, I was at a U2 concert, the one rock concert I've ever been to in my entire life. I'm that boring, that boring. I went to one Rattle and Hum concert in the, 90s, it was in the 90s. And there was a moment where they were singing one of their ballad songs and people were swaying and the person I was there with was like, it's just like a worship service. Oh, okay. That really bothered me because the feeling of a worship service had been in my mind precious. And I realized, no, it's not precious at all. It can be evoked by an experience outside of you.
Right.
And that's when I kind of like, I have to not clamor for things. I think of even when the Pharisees were asking for a sign. This demanding of things for themselves. That was not them asking because I really want to know. They're like, prove it.
Right.
There's a kind of request that we can make that is, I think, selfish. I recoil from that because I feel like I could fool myself into something. And so I just try to stay calm and patient about it.
I know exactly how you feel.
So hearing you describe that, I was like, for me, I'm going to just take that and it's just going to be not something that I demand or press for, but when things happen, to be just a bit more aware because the story, when Samuel was a child getting the whisper and he would go, it's like, hey, I heard something. The proper response that he got from his teacher was to just say, yes, Lord. Just to respond in an acknowledgement that what you're hearing is coming from God and then just be open to hear what that is.
Having somebody like John and other people I can rely on to bounce, hey, I feel like I'm hearing this from the Lord. You got to have somebody that's not just going to jump and say yes every single time. You got to be willing to say no. But he has a lot of wisdom on, well, this is normally how that kind of thing goes. See if that happens. Or keep asking in this way. Start a conversation with the Lord to see if there's anything else about it. Or a lot of times you have something missing that, you get part of it, but you need to make sure it makes sense because a lot of the times we cut our brain off before the whole thing comes. Just those little things, you have no idea until you start doing that stuff. And it's like, wow, the Lord has been speaking to me for a long time and I had no idea he was. And there are moments now I catch, oh, that was the Lord. But it was the same kind of thing that would happen before. that I just had for my whole Christian life. I had no idea he was talking to me.
Mm.
Kind of like you mentioned a little bit ago.
Yeah, like, well, wait a minute. Maybe that's what that was. And I just didn't think of it that way.
Right.
But like, well, God doesn't need me to think of it that way in order to help me.
Yeah.
It's like, whatever, Mark.
Exactly. Yeah.
Here you go.
Yep.
All right. Having gone through that whole process, there will be people who might be facing this themselves, people who know somebody who's facing it. Provide some insight based on your own experience that could be helpful for others.
I'll just go through the different people groups you mentioned. So the person going through it, you're kind of starting to self-doubt, or you're going through so many different theological changes, something like that. I'm sure there's experiences I definitely haven't had, but it'd be akin to those things. I would say just continue to be honest and keep relationships open is definitely huge, especially the relationships with people like I had that are going to keep you as a friend. Don't just write them off or be afraid of what they're going to say, because you're pretty much alone for a while. I didn't have an experience where I had some Christians really, really hurt me, or I was fixated on one thing like evil in the world. It wasn't any of that normally drives people away from their faith. But if it is that thing, make sure you're being brutally honest with that thing, that, yeah, you just got hurt by some really bad people and you shouldn't be basing your changes on that. Or maybe there's this one aspect of evil in the world, but there are people who have studied that subject and come out with a very different thought than I need to leave my faith. So be careful the reason you're leaving, because I saw so many people that were in the same camp as me as an agnostic that they really shouldn't be an agnostic. They should have searched way more than they did. They just got mad about something. And so make sure you're being honest, because whatever reality is, you want to be open to it. And so just be really, really sure why you're leaving. And if you're kind of at the bottom, at the neutral place, this is kind of a tricky thing, because I know there are people out there that they want to steer far away from supernatural things. They want it to be hardcore facts. Personally, I couldn't do that. But even if that were a possibility in my mind, that you could have faith based solely on researching things, you still should be open to the supernatural type things. The Bible obviously has a lot to say about it, but just be open no matter what. If you're at the base layer, and don't stop searching. I think that's one regret that I have, is that I stopped searching.
Well, I like how you described the brutally honest. I mean, it's like you're saying be an honest agnostic.
Yeah.
And an honest agnostic can't deliberately partition off an area of topic and be like, no, not that.
Right.
That's a legitimate rejection. That's making your decision. To be agnostic, you have to say, I don't know.
Yeah.
Okay.
If you're somebody that you are a Christian, you are a Unitarian, and you have a relative that's going through this, be that really good friend. Reassure them that you're not going to just ditch them because of their beliefs. And be willing to send them resources if they're kind of interested in something. Make sure that you're there, because it's very difficult already to come out as someone who doesn't have any more faith. And it's very hard to wrestle with all those things. The process is really hard. And be really, really patient. Just have the mind of Christ about them. If they're being a very honest person, be equally as honest back. Don't get hung up on that they're ditching everything that you've taught them, if it's your kid or been a friend forever.
Yeah, the emotions that would come up there.
I'm sure the emotions are hard as a parent, but don't just stomp them out. Meeting so many other agnostics or atheists, mostly atheists, they have so much animosity for people that have hurt them because they left the faith. They might have started off like I did, being honest, like starting to question. And then they just got booted out of the church, or their family was like, oh, you just want to sin. It kind of just pushed them away way faster than they should have. It rushed the process way too far to the other end of the spectrum.
Yeah.
I'm not sure, but I'm always, my inbox is always open on Messenger or something. So if you have somebody like that, I'm always willing to talk to anybody about that kind of stuff.
Okay.
One thing that I did is I had those moments of doubt where it'd be a couple weeks here and there, maybe a month one time. And so what would happen is I would build my faith back up on kind of shaky ground. As much as I don't want someone to not be a Christian, I don't want them to have to ride a roller coaster. So if you're on the way back up, make sure you're checking the reasons why you're coming back up. Because if you're not putting something firm underneath you, if you're prone to doubt like that, the floor could come right back up.
For example, maybe don't come back to being a Christian because you met a cute girl. Like, would that
definitely not that? Because it's going to cause a lot of.
Is that not going to work? No. Okay. All right.
No, because you'll probably go back to not being Christian while you're married to her. That can be hard for both of you.
Yeah.
But, yeah. And one thing I will say is, I don't want to come off as this is the way I came back into the faith is the only way. I think God is. I've seen God use other ways, and so if it's through science or research, fantastic. Just be, again, brutally honest. I am more than happy to talk to anybody if they want to go the same route I went. I do know enough people that if they're really, really uneasy about the way that I went, I say the way I went about it, but it was the Lord dragging me back into it. I didn't want to go. But if they're really uneasy about that, I know plenty of people that can walk them through some other routes as well.
Yeah. Well, that's fantastic. Well, Josiah, it's so good to reconnect because, you dropped off the map. And then when I heard how you came back, I was like, there's some lessons in this that I would love to share. And we finally got to do it. So thank you very much.
Absolutely. Appreciate you.
I've had some chats with people, and I'm considering a follow-up monologue where I reflect on this. This topic is heavy with soul-searching. Now, it may be easier to just critique some doubting person's lack of faith. I mean, as religious people, pointing the finger is something we've likely honed to a razor-sharp edge. And that's the problem. There's the quick judgment, or there's the careful and thoughtful engagement. I'll be honest, I don't have the time to engage with everything of interest. I have topics I've not fully explored. People write me and ask me about things, so I always try to be honest and humbly represent where I stand. The goal here isn't to be right or to be seen as the grand authority on faith. It's to be helpful. And being honest is the most helpful I can be. I don't want to set someone up with some inflated ideas that I lack substance on, but that I use charisma or energy or fear to manipulate them into agreement. That type of leadership is a ticking time bomb, a house of cards. We have a new event on our list for July, though it isn't exactly new, as some of you or your kids have attended Fuel in the past. Unfortunately, or not so unfortunately, the March debate event is reporting that it is sold out. That's the Dale Tuggy and James White debate in Texas. It should be interesting. June has a young adult event in Tennessee. July has the Fuel event in Indiana for young people. Also in July is the UCA UK International Conference in Windsor, UK, July 25 through 27. Finally, in October, it's the annual UCA conference here in the States at a retreat center, October 17th through 19th, plus breakfast on the 20th. It's near Little Rock, Arkansas, at the Vines Center. A reminder of what this event list is about. This is a service we provide to promote events you or your group may be doing that are welcoming of a broader UCA audience. Many are isolated, and an event like this, especially close to where they live, could be exactly what they need to connect. Our website has these events and details on how to get your event listed. Go to UnitarianChristianAlliance.org/events to learn more. Please write me podcast@UnitarianChristianAlliance.org. I love to read your notes here. Some of the interesting notes I got recently may end up as part of a follow-up episode on this topic. Thank you for those. If these 2 episodes helped you, first, I'd love to know about it. Write me. But even more importantly, if you know someone else who would benefit from it, let them know. If you aren't very comfortable talking about podcast technology, you may be hesitant to explain it to your Aunt Melissa. As a courtesy, I'll do it for you. I've put this next section in the show notes and the index so you can find it later. With this section queued up and ready to go, call your aunt or go over and visit. Tell her that Mark Cain personally wanted to help, and here he is. Then hit play. Hi, I'm Mark Cain, and your friend here thinks you'd appreciate this podcast. Since new technology can be tricky, I wanted to help. Here's what I suggest. Ask and see which of your closest friends or family listens to podcasts, and have them help set you up the same way they do it. That way, you'll have someone nearby you can ask for help if you need it. So, podcast players, they're like movie apps, like Netflix. They let you search for and subscribe to audio programs. Every topic is out there, and the UCA podcast is one of them. Your friend here listens to the UCA podcast a lot. Ask your friend which episode is their favorite. You could use YouTube to listen to the podcast. It is there. But it's worth at least trying to get a dedicated player. Why? Well, it's like having your very own customizable talk radio show with you when you're working around the house. You search for your favorite topics, subscribe to some podcasts, and then you become your own programming director. Cool. So once you get the podcast app, just search for Unitarian Christian Alliance, and you'll find my podcast there. Click follow or subscribe, and you're set. Most podcast players will even pop up a little notice when a new episode is released. How cool is that? And podcasts are not like television programs. You can listen to them whenever you want. They are always ready. Thank your friend here for thinking of you. It was great to meet you. See? A full-service podcast. Brandon Duke is trying something new. He's asking for short, crowdsourced videos to be released as YouTube Shorts. Crowdsourced means the content comes from the audience, the crowd. Here's how Brandon has described it. I'm interested in widening the content available on the UCA YouTube channel. The Shorts, the video series featuring Dale Tuggy and Keegan Chandler, have reached a very wide audience, and I've got an intuition that it would be a good idea to keep going with that, featuring you. So here's my idea, writes Brandon. Record yourself, less than 60 seconds in length, and share the video to my official UCA email, media@unitarianchristianalliance.org. What would you want to tell the world about Unitarianism in 60 seconds or less? Would you make an argument? Would you give your testimony? Would you quickly clarify a proof text? Would you offer encouragement or something else? I'm not promising to post everything. We'll need to sort through and decide which would be good to share. But I think you all have so much wisdom and that your voices, all combined, will be powerful. Let's experiment and see where it goes. Well, thank you, Brandon. A great idea. He announced this just last weekend, and someone has already done it. This was just released on the UCA YouTube channel a few days ago from Greg, one of the UCA members.
I would like to say this. Mainstream theology should not be considered infallible. While we must take care not to be blown around by every wind of doctrine, we must also constantly test the teachings we have heard for biblical accuracy. I believe that mainstream Christianity has by and large abandoned the historical and scriptural Jesus for another Jesus, a Jesus that stems from unnecessary metaphysical speculations that rendered him not like his brethren in every respect, but instead declares him to be a confusing, dual-natured being who is part of an incomprehensible triune being. I believe with Jesus that Yahweh, the Father, is the only true God. As a former Trinitarian, now a biblical Unitarian, I believe that Jesus is God's human Son, a man approved of God, and that God has given Jesus all authority in heaven and on earth. May God be with you as you seek His truth.
Cool. So, a video clip that is a minute or less, and share it or email it to media@unitarianchristianalliance.org. Thanks again, Josiah, for opening yourself up to help others. Oh, and Josiah is on Facebook. Or you can write me, podcast@unitarianchristianalliance.org, and I'll connect you. As I was editing this part 2 over the last weekend, I got a text from Josiah. Mark, here's a passage I really resonate with. The timing was excellent. 1 Corinthians 2, 1-5. And when I came to you, brothers and sisters, I did not come as someone superior in speaking ability or wisdom, as I proclaimed to you the testimony of God. For I determined to know nothing among you except Jesus Christ and Him crucified. I also was with you in weakness and fear and in great trembling. My message and my preaching were not in persuasive words of wisdom, but in demonstration of the Spirit and of power, so that your faith would not rest on the wisdom of mankind, but on the power of God. May God bless you in your truth pursuits. I hope this podcast serves you well.